Okay, everybody, it's 8:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining me this morning bright and early at 8:30. I'm normally just starting my drive to work right now, so in case I doze off in the middle of my presentation somewhere, just please kindly wake me up and I'll resume where I started. Want to get a quick read of the room. How many of you have worked with Power Apps before? Okay, lots of you. How many of you have worked with Dynamics before? Okay, also a lot of you. Okay, so one of the things I want to give you as a bit of a heads up is as we talk about the Common Data Service for apps today, for those of you that are experienced Dynamics users, some of this may be a little bit more review for you. However, you will be able to see how these various experiences start to percolate through the new Power Apps Maker experience, okay? So I want to level set for you. You know, if you are a Dynamics MVP in the audience, you could probably teach me about some of these things. And so as a result, you know, I want to be able to enable you to make the best use of your time today, all right? So my name is Ryan Jones. I'm the Group Program Manager for Platform Services in the Citizen Application Platform Group. And so my team, we're responsible for the API down for Power Apps, for Dynamics 365 customer engagement, so on and so forth. So everything from how do we host the infrastructure that powers Dynamics, Power Apps, up to how do we persist your critical business data, to how we expose it through the various APIs that you consume in your applications and services that you build today. My background, I come from Azure. I ran the Azure Resource Manager team for, gosh, almost 3 years, and so joined the Dynamics group last year to actually reunite with some of my old friends that I'd built ARM with. So really excited to be with you guys today. And so with that, let's get into the content. Our agenda. First off, we're going to do a brief recap of what the Common Data Service for Apps is. We'll then speak about common scenarios, the types of apps that we think people will build, and patterns that you will use to build these applications. We'll touch on the different types of Common Data Service for Apps instance types, which are available. And we'll touch on the Common Data Model and how that will hopefully help you build your applications. We'll dig into how to define entities, fields, option sets, as well as calculated fields. And then we'll turn things up a bit to go into more complicated relationships and roll-ups. From there, we'll talk about business rules. And then we'll walk into how we expose all of these lower level constructs through our various UI components that we have available: forms, views, dashboards, charts, and applications. And then finally, we'll dig into business logic with Microsoft Flow. Now, one other housekeeping item that I wanted to touch on, if you looked at the abstract for today's sessions, we mentioned working with plugins and virtual entities. We didn't have enough time to fit that into this session today, but I believe Mr. Matt Barber, who's in the back of the room, will be presenting on these topics later this afternoon, okay? So you'll still be able to dig into those items while you're here at Build. So let's get down to business. First of all, what is the Common Data Service for Apps? And so my one-sentence elevator pitch to folks that ask me is, it's the system of record for business-critical transactional data. If you have data that is important to running your business on a day-to-day basis and you want it to be exposed through applications, there's a good chance that it should be placed in the Common Data Service. Now you may be saying, okay, Ryan, that's a great marketing speak statement, but what's really in the Common Data Service? Well, let's look at a layer cake. At the very bottom of the cake, we have your data definition, the definition of your entities, the fields in them, so on and so forth. Over the top of that, you're able to layer your business rules and your business logic. All of these items are then exposed through a set of public APIs, which are consumed by not only our clients, the web client, the unified client interface client, or your own custom client. And then finally, this percolates up through our forms, views, charts, and dashboards. And so with that in mind, let's talk about the types of applications you'll build. First of all, we see that a lot of times the quickest way to get started is to take an application that already exists, either built by Microsoft or some other third party, and just tweak it a little bit to meet your organization's need. The second thing, or second type of app, are what we call satellite apps. These are applications which extend the capability. They might be kind of standalone, but they end up touching some of the data that is a part of kind of those first business critical applications. And then the final flavor are pure standalone apps, okay? Apps that really don't touch, by and large, the rest of your business data, but you still have a need for. And so, in fact, our example that we'll be digging into today, we're going to start in the world of standalone applications, but we'll kind of move over into the satellite app space by the time we're done with today's session, all right? And so when we think about the apps that you'll build, maybe a bit more of a graphical representation. Sorry, let me tell Skype once again to do not disturb. Otherwise, we'll get some interesting comments in the middle of the presentation. So when we look at how companies are transforming their businesses today, how they're undergoing digital transformation, we see at the end of the day they're trying to sort out, hey, how do I manage my talent and my people to build the right products, to deliver the right services to my customers. And so within the Dynamics 365 portfolio, we have a set of applications which are designed to do this today, whether that's our talent applications, our finance and operations applications, or our sales and marketing apps. But these apps, while they are great, off the shelf, each business has their own distinct and special business processes, so on and so forth. And so you very well may be called upon to customize those applications. You see, we went from black to pink here. The pink is the customization here. But then we also see that along the way, there's needs for all sorts of little like apps, or I would call them applets, but I guess that term's already taken for good or for ill. But we see all these little satellite applications that are built along the way to help extend my marketing app, that are used to extend my operations app, that are used to extend my talent app. And then finally, we see that there's a set of satellites that surround all of these core business processes. So it's, you know, apps on a cycle, virtuous cycle, I think is the proper term. So building apps. From here, you have two paths. You want to build an app. The first one is what we call a Canvas app. And when you build a Canvas app, you're focused on really providing a pixel-perfect, UI-focused design. And so when you do that, you start with the UX and work your way down. You'll define the screens that you want, where you want the icons, the text fields, so on and so forth. Then you define how do you bind that to data, and you work your way from the UX down in the stack. There's another way of building applications, which we call model apps or model-driven apps. And in this case, you start with the data and you work your way up. Okay? Now, when we think about the pros and cons of these two different choices, let's say that you want to build the most beautiful, expressive app ever. Canvas provides you with the tools that you need to do that. However, let's assume that you're building a very complex app with lots of entities and very different interwoven journeys or UX paths. Model apps lend themselves much better to those sorts of applications because simply you don't have to create so many screens. Also, they're more dynamic to layout, so on and so forth. And so in today's session, we're going to focus on model-driven applications. We're going to start by defining our entities, our fields, so on and so forth, defining our business logic, and then consuming that through forms, views, so on and so forth. And so, since we're starting with data, one of the challenges that I always face, it's kind of like when you're back in college or high school and you have to write a paper and you're staring at the empty page. Sometimes that can be a big challenge to get started. Blank pages are quite scary. But you don't need to worry, because when you're building applications on top of the Common Data Service for apps, we provide what we call the Common Data Model. The Common Data Model is a modular definition of standard entities which represent commonly used concepts and activities across business and productivity applications. And to show this in a graphical manner, if we start at the bottom, we have a set of common application and foundational entities in the Common Data Model. And then on top of that, we layer the entities that are used in our CRM products and applications, which include lead management, marketing, product management, sales, service, scheduling, so on and so forth. This contains a bajillion entities, a very technical term, I know. I'm not going to go into, even though this is a 300-level course, of enumerating all of those. I'll let you do that when you get back home. But you'll see right here is a link towards documentation for the common data model. And so when you procure an instance to start building your CDS apps, what have you, we have two flavors that you can choose. The one is what I call the base instance. And this is what you get when you go to powerapps.microsoft.com and create a new CDS instance. And so this includes the base layers of that stack. It includes application common, foundation common, so on and so forth. So this will have like your common entities that practically every app uses, like account, contact, so on and so forth. Now, if you go and procure a CDS-A instance through Dynamics, what you'll get is application common, foundation common, as well as CRM common, and all of the different application components on top of it. And so, of course, if you were looking to build applications that leverage opportunity, goal, so on and so forth, you'd go and grab or snag the instance type on the left. And for today's discussion, we are going to be using the CDS apps base instance that you get if you went to powerapps.com today. Okay? So, let's go into Entity 101. How many of you have defined an entity in Dynamics before? Okay, so for you guys, just hold on. We'll get to interesting stuff for you here in a minute. For everybody else, every entity has a display name used in all the various forms. Think about when you're showing a single entity, so if you have a entity type of widgets, plural, when you view a widget, this is the name that is displayed. We also get the plural display name, which is used in views or places where we're displaying more than one widget, i.e. widgets. We have a name which is invariant and immutable for this entity that is used across the various APIs for working with this entity. We have a description, which is used in contextual help throughout the experience. And then an entity may have 1, 2, or 0 or more additional fields. The display name, plural display name, and name are all required. Now, fields. For every field, there is a display name that's used in forms. There is a name, which is invariant and immutable, which is used in the APIs. There is a data type, which is used for persistence and presentation. It also informs us in our various client UXs how to light up certain special functionality. So for example, if you tell us, hey, I have this thing that's a ticker symbol, we have a little link next to it where you can click it and we'll pull up, the Bing data for that particular stock market symbol. We have a flag which specifies whether or not that field is required, whether it's searchable, so whether or not that field will be indexed and then later quickly searchable, a description used in contextual help, and then data type specific constraints. So for example, on numeric values, it could be lower or upper bounds. For a string, it might be a maximum length, so on and so forth. You get the general idea. And so we support a broad set of data types in the platform: text, text area, email, URL, ticker symbol, phone, so on and so forth. And of course, with these different data types, we are able to provide rich experiences based on how you've specified them. So for example, with an email, if you click on it, we'll pop use like the mail to type intent. Or if you have an URL, if you click it, we will open it. Stock ticker will open up, we'll search for it on Bing or what have you and show the market data for that particular symbol. And so let's pop open an application quickly and look at how we have defined a few entities. And so, wrong one. Excellent. So here I have defined in this application 3 entities. Oh, I should give a bit of background before we dig into the application. So I have 2 little girls at home. One is 2, one is 5. They are the reason I come to work every day. Not that I don't enjoy working on the Common Data Service for apps, but braces are expensive, so is college. And so at our house, especially at age of 2 and 5, we make lots and lots of cupcakes. every day, mommy, daddy, I want a cupcake. And so our demo for today is a cupcake request app where our girls can come in and request cupcakes from mommy or daddy, specify the number of cupcakes, the type of cake, the type of icing, and hopefully we will be able to fulfill the request to maximize smiles and minimize tears. And so I have 3 entities here. The first one that we'll pull up is the cake entity. And so this one's very straightforward. We literally have a primary name for the cake. So is it, is it white cake? Is it yellow cake? So on and so forth. Fairly straightforward. I then have the icing entity, which is a little bit more involved in that in addition to the primary name, we have an attribute which is dyeable. So, think about when you have icing, chocolate icing, you can't really add food coloring and it really have much of an impact. So we wanted to reflect this in our data model. And so that dyeable attribute is actually of type 2 options. And so we have, yes or no for whether or not that icing is dyeable. And then I'll go to the entity, which really we use through most of our demonstration today, which is the cupcake request. And so I have a variety of different attributes on my cupcake request, including, of course, the primary name, the quantity, which is a whole number. And so if I pull up my quantity here, you'll see that I set a minimum value of 1 because requesting 0 cupcakes, let's be honest, never happens around our house. And I don't know what a negative cupcake request looks like. I guess we'd have to have antimatter cupcakes or something like that. So that gives us an example of options. It gives us an example of constraints around a value. The other thing I wanted to show you is using an option set. Think of an option set as a way of being able to define the data set which can be used in a pick list. And so if I look at my icing color, what we'll see is this is an option set, and I can now pull up my option set, which then shows the variety of colors which we allow our daughters to select for coloring the icing on their cupcakes. Okay? So we've looked at a variety of entity definitions. We have looked at how to use option sets or 2 options. We've looked at how to set data types of whole numbers with constraints. And so if we were to take a look at how this manifests itself in the application, I can go and look at my icing types. And so you'll see we have chocolate Bavarian icing, chocolate buttercream icing, and the yes/no, of course, is whether or not it's dyeable, cream cheese, strawberry, vanilla Bavarian, and vanilla buttercream. Or if we wanted to look at our cake types, we have chocolate funfetti swirl, white and yellow cake. And then if I were to pull up my cupcake requests, we can see we have a variety of cupcake requests active at the moment, everything from chocolate chocolate to grandma's housewarming party to pa's retirement party, so on and so forth. Okay? So the next thing I wanted to touch on are calculated fields. If you've worked with SQL before, you know these as computed columns. And so for any calculated field definition, there are a few key components. The first one is an if section. This is optional, and it has a condition and then an action if that is true. And of course, if an if is specified, then you'll have an else as well, which has the condition and action, subject, and predicate. Example of this would be concatenated strings. So set full name to concat first name, a space, and last name. Or arithmetic. Hey, if the opportunity state is open, then actions set weighted revenue to estimated value times close probability as one such example. And so I have a calculated field in our demonstration. If I go over to my cupcake request and I look at the description, I will open the calculation. Now for those of you that are Dynamics folks, you'll feel like we just hopped in our time machine and went back to good old Dynamics that you know and love. But here's where we have our calculated fields editor where we set description. Here in this case I don't have a condition because it's not necessary, but here I set description to a cake primary name cupcake with icing primary name icing. So this would say a funfetti cupcake with Bavarian buttercream icing. That's actually not an icing option in our list, but you get the general idea. Now, one of the things that I'd point out here is these are generally used within rows. However, it is possible through relationships for us to retrieve attributes from referenced entities. So here you'll see that my primary name here, when I'm getting the icing name, is actually being retrieved by the off of the icing attribute. Okay, so it's kind of like I guess a join or a lookup of sorts, which in fact I think takes us to our next topic. Before I look at it though, let's take a quick view of how this is represented in the application. So if I open up the cupcakes for pause retirement and scroll down and look at description, we'll see a swirl, white and chocolate cupcake, yada, yada, yada. Okay? So flip back over to our presentation. The next thing I wanted to talk about are relationships. And we started to get into this a little bit in our last demo, but we support 3 different types of relationships in the system. One is a one-to-many. The other would be many-to-one. This is also known as a lookup, and this is probably the single most common type of relationship that you'll have in the system. And then the final that we have is a many-to-many relationship. Now, for any of these different relationship types, you can define that they are required, or you can make them optional. And so I use these quite a bit in the basic demonstration that we have today. So let me go over to here. And so the first thing that I am going to do is I am going to look at my cupcake request. I will close here. Done. And go to relationships. So the first relationship that I have is between my cupcake request and the cake type. Okay, so this is how I specify whether my cupcake is of, white, yellow, chocolate, so on and so forth variant. The next thing I'm able to do is I have a relationship defined with icing, where I'm able to specify the icing type for the cupcake. And then finally, I have a relationship with contact, which specifies which contact is this particular cupcake request for. And so all of these are many-to-one relationships. And so if I select this guy right here, you'll see that it provides a very handy editor for this. I have to say, I always get confused about one-to-many and many-to-one. So what I always do is use that little arrow in the middle, so I guess, and then use the arrow to understand, oh yes, it is one cake to many cupcake orders, while one cupcake order to many cake types would not make sense. So I always use the little arrow. Maybe you guys are smart enough that you don't have to use that hint, but that's how I keep it straight. So those are relationships. And so when we look at how this manifests itself in our application, it's actually quite transparent in that if I select, let's go to cake type here, and let's say that I want to remove that. If I go in and say, let's say we wanted to make this yellow cake, we'll see here I start to type yellow, it searches that, finds it, and I select that, and we are good to go. And so you'll see that, of course, I wasn't seeing the way it was joined or anything else. I didn't even have to define that. I just said, hey, there's a relationship, and the application knows what to do from there. So once you have relationships in place, this enables something that you're able to do called roll-up fields. And so these are aggregates based on joined data. For any roll-up field, there are a couple of key entities, or key entities, key items. The first is a source entity. You'll define a source entity name, and then you'll define whether or not you want us to use the hierarchy of that entity in the roll-up. The next item is the related entity, and there you'll have a related entity name as well as a filter. You can then specify what type of aggregation you would like to perform, whether that would be an average, a count, a max, a min, or a sum of that given field name. And to provide you with a couple of examples, this could be, hey, what is the total estimated revenue of open opportunities for an account? Or it could be, hey, show me what the oldest high severity support request is for an account. Okay, makes sense? And so let's look at an example here. So as I mentioned earlier, we have lots and lots and lots and lots of cupcake requests at our house. And so one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to make sure that I could view the number of cupcakes that had been requested by each of our cupcake request stores. Now, in this case, what I did, and this is where, remember how earlier I said we kind of start in standalone app space, but then we're kind of going to migrate more into a satellite application pattern? Here, I came to the realization, well, wait a second. I don't need to come up with a new way of representing a cupcake requester. In my system, in the common data model, in AppCommon, we already have a notion of what a contact is. However, it doesn't know what cupcake requests are. And so what I did is I went in and I modified the contact entity to include a rollup, which is number of cupcakes requested. And so I'll go to my entities list. Now you'll notice contact isn't showing up here. The reason why is because I have filtered my view to only show the custom entities that I have created. And so if I set this to all, you're now all the bajillion different entities that are contained within the CDS solution. And so if I go to contact, there's contact. Oh, sorry, clicked one too many times. And so I can scroll down and we will be able to find my cupcakes requested entity. Definitely not a, you'll see all the type, it's standard on everything here. It shows up as custom because we do not have a cupcakes requested field in our out-of-the-box CRM system. That was a joke. Thanks. And so here you'll see that we define this cupcakes requested. We say the data type is a whole number, and then we've said that it's a rollup. I can now open up my rollup field editor. And so here we'll see, hey, the source of this rollup is contact. I'm not using the hierarchy because I'm not trying to understand, cupcakes requested by household or anything like that. And then my related entity is I look at cupcake requests on the contact attribute, and then I perform the sum of quantity on cupcake requests. Make sense? And so if we go to my application to see what this looks like, I will navigate over to my contacts list. You'll see I'm very popular, but oh my gosh, my contacts are the cutest. And we'll see that I can, my youngest daughter, Audrey, has requested 16 cupcakes, and Hollis has requested 46. So Hollis might have a cupcake problem. Man, all of my jokes are falling flat this morning. I'm sorry, guys. And so those are roll-ups. And so now that we've defined the general structure of our data, we'll want to create business rules or form logic around them. And so this also follows a standard pattern of defining conditions and actions. And so our conditions include a display name for the condition, the entity that it targets, and a collection of rules. So what is the source entity? What's the field that we're validating or operating against? What operators are we using? So equals, not equals, less than, equal to, greater than, I'm sorry, there's a typo there, greater than or equal to, contains or not contains, and then a type, whether or not that should be a comparison or be operating against a specific value, against another field, or a formula. In case you have multiple rules in place, you'll define the rule logic. So are we performing a logical and or a logical or against those multiple rules? And then you get into the fun part, which are the actions. So within your actions, you can make a recommendation. An example of this would be, hey, I saw an order for 12. We have a volume discount at 13. Do you want to make this 13? You can also lock or unlock fields so that they can be made editable or non-editable. You can show an error message in case someone has, for example, provided a quantity that is invalid. You can set the field value based on this business rule. You can set a default value based on the business rule. You can make a value required in the UX, or you can set the visibility to hide or unhide the different items. And so to look at one of these business rules, we will go to our cupcake request entity. I'll go back to my scaled back view. And so I'll navigate to business rules. And so I have a business rule for is icing dyeable. And so what I do is I look at an attribute on my cupcake request, which is icing dyeable. Now what's interesting is, if you remember, Icing being dyeable is actually an attribute of the icing itself. So what I do is I use a calculated field to get the isDyeable attribute from the icing, place it onto the cupcake request entity, and then this business rule is able to operate against the cupcake request entity. And so what I do is I look at that attribute or that field and I look to see whether or not it is no. So if icing is dyeable equals no, then what I do is I set the icing color to none. So in case someone mistakenly comes in and says, hey, I want chocolate icing, but I want it to be pink, unless it's white chocolate, which in my mind isn't actually chocolate because it doesn't contain cocoa, we can go ahead and set it to no to correct their cupcake request. Now one could argue there are more elegant ways of doing this. You would be correct, however, simple example for us to discuss today. And so if I go to my application, let's see if we can reconnect. There we go. And so I'm going to go to cupcake requests, and I am going to create a new cupcake request. And so we will call this our build session cupcakes. We'll just pretend for a moment that Hollis requested, now actually she's requested a lot of cupcakes lately, so we'll say that Audrey requested these. And how many of us are there in here? Let's say 50. And the cake type, what type of cake would you like in our cupcakes? Yellow? Okay. And by the way, guys, there won't be cupcakes, so don't get your hopes up. It's low budget. What kind of icing? You can see the variety of options here. Actually, you know what? We need to pick non-dyeable icing, and so I'll give you a hint. Strawberry or one of the chocolates. Your choice. Chocolate? Okay, we'll go with chocolate buttercream. And so I'll set this to blue, which clearly won't actually work. But when I click Save, what we'll see is it set my icing color back to none because it saw that that chocolate buttercream is not a dyeable icing type. Okay? Excellent question. The question was, could you have an error message that popped up? So yes, in fact, if I go to the business rule designer, I could go in and add the, oh, I'm sorry, thank you so much. I've done so well, and then I forgot all of a sudden. And I even repeated the question earlier. I'm really proud of, So you'll see that we have a variety of actions available. I could have showed an error message as well, okay? So excellent question. Thank you very much. And apologies for not getting the demo machine switched back up for you. So the other thing that I want to touch on is, you know, this is a developers conference. We've been spending a lot of time in the GUI together, you know, pointing and clicking to design our data model, design our business rules, design our relationships. But everything that we're doing along the way is actually scaffolding APIs. And these APIs that we scaffold, we expose two endpoints. One is an endpoint, which is just a good old OData v4 endpoint, which you can consume via any OData client. The other one is a SOAP endpoint that is used by the CRM or XRM, if we go back in time, SDK, okay? And so you can use either one. I have demos of both. And we'll take a look at what this might look like. So in my first example, who wants to do OData first? Who wants to do SDK first? Okay, so we're going to do OData first. So here what I do is I establish an HTTP client. I build a request, which more or less has a base URI followed by contacts, and then I say, hey, I want to select full name. I then retrieve that result, and if that is successful, I dump it out to a little console app. And so if I pull up my console app here, we will see that I have successfully enumerated via an OData API a value array of contacts. You'll note that we provide an e-tag and an ID for that item, for each item that comes back, and then we'll have the full name, which is the attribute that I requested. Okay? So using simple, straightforward, standard HTTP client and Newtonsoft to deserialize, I'm able to interact with this API. So using standard stuff, interact with the API, no big deal. Now one of the things is you do have to know those different tools if you're less familiar with them. We do have, using our SDK, a slightly, I don't want to say it's more elegant because it does use SOAP behind the scenes, but a different way of doing this. Let's just say that. And so in this demo, I establish a connection to my CRM system. I then create an entity. In this case, I'm creating a cupcake request. We're calling it build cupcakes. I then actually issue the create request. We then define, create a column set to define which attributes we want to retrieve. We then perform a point get on the cupcake request that we just created. We then create a query and use our same column set that we created earlier and then retrieve the list of cupcake requests.
Excuse me.
Yes?
I'm getting old.
Oh.
Could you perhaps increase the
I apologize. Oh gosh, what is the quick key to do that? Who remembers?
Lower left-hand corner.
There it is. That good? Okay. So to review, we create an entity. We then create a column set to use in retrieve statements. We then retrieve the cupcake requests we just created. We'll then dump all of the cupcake requests to the command line, and then we'll go and delete the cupcake request. And so I've run this in the background. And so what you'll see here is where I have dumped all of the various cupcake requests that exist in the system. So functionally, quite similarly, two different ways of doing the same thing. One that has been around for a while and can be, in many cases, very simple and easy to use, but then a newer one that's a bit more standards-based if you're familiar with those standards. Okay? And the key thing is everything that we've been doing in the Maker experience today is using the APIs that I'm talking about. So if you wanted to retrieve a business rule definition, you want to retrieve an entity definition, all of those things are available through our APIs, not just the actual entity data itself that we're getting back in this particular example. Okay? Yeah, so the question was, hey, you have these two endpoints. I'm hearing most of the stuff is going OData. More or less, what's guidance or what's recommendation? Is that a correct? Okay. So we do view that the future is in our more standards-based APIs. And so we do recommend that you use the OData APIs. However, we do realize that lots of folks use our existing SDK against the SOAP endpoint. At some point, we will update our SDK to target the OData endpoint. Okay. One of the interesting things about that, though, is the way the SDK is structured. It's structured kind of similarly to how our SOAP endpoint is structured. And so when we do make that change, like that's going to be, a major revision of the SDK. Okay. Did I answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
What is the roadmap of the SOAP score? Is there a timeline that it will be deprecated?
No, we have, the question was, is there a timeline for SOAP API deprecation? The answer is not that we have announced. I mean, in reality, not even all of our components use the SOAP, or use the REST, I'm sorry, the OData APIs just yet. Okay? So now let's talk a little bit about the user interface components in a given application or solution. The first would be forms, which are used to create, read, or update an instance of a specific entity. The second would be views, which are used to display lists of a specific entity or lists for a specific entity. We then have charts, which are used to visualize specific entities, types, fields, or attributes. And then we have dashboards, which are used to display a panel of charts and or data streams, or more or less views from up above. And so we have a variety of these in our demo today. What I'll do is we'll look at how these were defined, and then we will look at how they are rendered in the client. Sorry, I had to switch over to the phone to see a picture of the girls again. So we'll go back over to our Maker experience. I'll tell it that I am done. And so I'll browse to one of my entities. We'll go to the cake entity. And then we'll view, actually let's not do cake. Let's do a simple one first. I'll browse to forms. And so we'll see we have the 3 different forms for icing. One is the main view, which is what we see in most of the items that we're going, or most of the experiences we've been clicking through today. There's also the card and the quick view. So we'll open up this particular, I'm sorry, I said view. I meant to say forms. And so we'll open up this form definition. In the general section, we always have the primary name and the owner, which are required. And then here we'll have that dyeable attribute, which was that additional attribute that I added for whether or not the icing is dyeable. And so one key thing to keep in mind if you're new to this experience is when you're editing your entities, you're adding fields right and left. Those aren't going to show up on your forms by default. We will scaffold or create the basic forms, which include the primary name and owner field on them. However, you'll have to go in and drag and drop the different, additional fields onto the form. This is something that has taken me a long time to get used to, because go make a change and then you go look to see it and you're like, oh, where is it? And then I remember, oh, I have to go add it to the form. And so that's an example of our customized icing form. I can also go and let's pull up a slightly more complicated or involved example, which is my cupcake request. I'll go to my form definition. I'll open up my main form. And so here, let me see if I can zoom this in a little bit. We'll see that here, because I have so many more custom attributes or fields on this guy, that we have lots of additional attributes that I've dragged and dropped into this particular form. Okay? And so if we look at how this is rendered in the experience, we can go look at our icing types, where here we have the chocolate Bavarian icing. Yep. Maybe not from my phone, so we'll go to backup, we'll go to the PC. Oh, my phone came back. Just looks like it dropped off the network there for a second. And so I'm able to view my icing, the chocolate Bavarian icing, which shows the primary name, whether it's dyeable, and the owner for that based on that view definition we saw a moment ago. Or if I look at my cupcake requests, I can select the ones for pause retirement. And so we will see all of those various custom fields that we dropped onto that form. Okay. Now, we'll go over to, now let's take a look at our view definitions. So I'll go to views. And so one of the things you'll notice here, kind of similarly to what we did on the last screen, is we hide a lot of the default views or things that get automatically created for you. So if I remove that filter, now I'm able to see the views. The one that we're using through today's demos are the active cupcake requests. And so if I open that up, this will pull up our view editor. And so the primary thing that I find myself doing in this experience is, hey, I'm going to add or remove the various columns that I want to display for this particular entity, for these cupcake requests. And so one of the things that at least I find quite helpful and interesting, and where there's a huge time saver and a big productivity boost, is that when I am viewing this from my browser and I look at active cupcake requests, I get this wide, adaptive rendering of the different cupcake requests based on that view definition in my last screen. However, if I pull up my phone and I look at my list of active cupcake requests, we'll see that this has been laid out, differently, or to most efficiently use the space that is on my mobile phone. Now we'll take a look at charts. So I'll go over to my maker experience and we'll view our chart definitions. And I created 3. All 3 of these look at quantity of cupcakes, which have been requested by cake type, by icing type, and by icing color. So I'll open up these chart definitions. And so here is quantity by cake. And so you'll see that we sum quantity based on the cake attribute. And so we will see that it looks like 95. Oh, in the preview window here, it doesn't show us, but we definitely have one type of cake that is dominating our number of cupcake requests. Similarly, I can pull up and look at our icing chart, quantity by icing chart. And you'll see that we are able to sum the quantity of cupcake requests based on the icing requested. Or, and let's see, to be a bit more efficient, I'm sorry, I will click over here. And then finally, we're able to show a chart which is quantity by icing color. And so, we have a dominating color. What is that? None, because we've had lots of chocolate cupcake requests lately. And so if we look at how these are rendered in our experience, let's actually look at them through a dashboard, which is a collection of charts and data. So I'll pull up my dashboard. We'll look at my dashboard definition. And so here we'll see, it was yellow cake that dominates our current number of requests with chocolate buttercream and with no icing color. Okay, and then if I scroll down, I've defined the view which shows all of our active cupcake requests. And so to look at what this looks like on our client, I will go to here and then I will select Open Dashboards. Oh, looks like my phone's having some challenges on the Wi-Fi. We'll switch over to the desktop to look at this. Oh, it went. I'm just too impatient. That's what it is. And so here we can view my 7 active cupcake requests. So all the various ones that I've added. Or if I go to Show Visual Filter, we can see the charts that we defined in the last view where I'm able to see quantity by cake, quantity by icing, or quantity by icing color. So that's a demonstration of our different user interface components. The next thing that I want to touch on is business logic and how we can actually automate various business processes by using the Common Data Service for apps as well as Microsoft Flow. Now we have a variety of triggers that can trigger these automated workflows. Record created, record updated, record created or updated, or record deleted. And then we can not only use Flow as kind of to be triggered based on things in Dynamics. Flow can also push things into Dynamics as well. So it can take a set of actions such as creating a record, updating a record, reading a record, listing multiple records, or deleting a record. Okay? And so I have a demonstration of this. One of the key things that we find, especially with our 2-year-old, is response time to the cupcake request is paramount. Otherwise, you'll end up with tears, tantrums, so on and so forth. How many of you have kids? How many of you had tears over a cupcake request? Okay, yeah, so a few of you. For those of you that didn't raise your hand, I want to know your secret, because I clearly am doing it wrong. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Power Apps Maker experience. I'm going to go to Business Logic, and then I'm going to select Flows. And so here I have a flow definition. And what it's doing is when a record is created or updated, send a text message. And so here, just so that you guys can see this particular item, I connect to my demo organization, and I am watching the cupcake requests entity name. Now, one important prerequisite that you should know about is on your entity definition, you will need to enable change tracking, A quick note that change tracking flag is not available in the new Maker experience yet, so you'll have to flip over to the old Solution Explorer experience to set that flag. But once that's done, we can then be triggered on these sorts of events. And then what I'm doing is I'm sending a text message. And I'm using the Twilio connector. How many of you have used Twilio before? Right, a very, very simple or straightforward telephony SMS service, which allows you to take all sorts of interesting actions based on API calls. And they are one of, I believe, 200 or more connectors that plug into Microsoft Flow. And so I'm able to say, hey, from that phone number, send a text message to the phone number that you see there. And the body of the text will be, description has been requested. Now, if you remember, description was a calculated field that we created on our cupcake entity earlier. And so that's the one that says, you know, like a chocolate cupcake with funfetti icing has been requested, okay? And so if I go in and let's just tell it to test the flow. And I'll use data from a previous run. And so I'll click Save and Test. And then what I'll try to do is flip over to my phone fast enough that we can see the text come in. So save and test. And so now we'll wait. Okay, it says it completed successfully. Did I get my text message? Oh, there it is. Sent from your Twilio account, a yellow cupcake with chocolate buttercream icing has been requested, so that my wife or I can very quickly and urgently respond to this cupcake no matter where we're at. Whether I'm at work or whether I'm working in the yard, I will know that Audrey wants a cupcake and she wants it now. So we aim to please in our house. I'm pretty sure we're creating monsters. So, to recap what we've talked about today, we've given a brief introduction to the Common Data Service for apps. We've talked about the common scenarios and patterns for building apps, whether that's customizing an application, building a satellite application, or building a wholly standalone application. And we've talked about the various application development patterns that you may use on a day-to-day basis, whether that's building Canvas applications or building model-driven applications. We touched on the various CDS instance types that are available, whether that's the base CDS instance, which includes the app common entities, or whether or not that's a Dynamics instance, which includes the suite or selection of Dynamics sales service marketing entities. We've walked through how to define entities, fields, option sets, and calculated fields. We've talked about relationships between entities and roll-ups against those relationships. We've covered how to create business rules through our Business Rules Designer. We've walked through forms, views, dashboards, charts. Ooh, I forgot to show you apps. I'm so glad I had this in the slide, guys. I'm so sorry. We'll go back to that. And we've talked about business logic with Microsoft Flows. So that reminds me, the one thing that I didn't show you was how we actually get all of this work that we've done to manifest itself as an application in the various app discovery views that your users will find. And so what I'll do is I'll go to apps. And so here I have created a specific application called Cupcake App creatively. And so I will edit that. And so the app editor, I would say, is a little bit of a misnomer. What it's really doing is it's saying, hey, of all of the things that are running in this CDS instance, what are the items that I want to be published to my user experience? It's more of a UI construct, more so than it is a definition of what's going on in the back end. And so I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. And so I am able to go in and I'm able to define my sitemap. So when you saw me clicking around and flipping back and forth between cupcake requests, icing types, cake types, and contacts, that's because I had defined those here. And so you'll see that when I look at my cupcake request sub area, it links to the cupcake request entity. I provide a title for it, so on and so forth. Same thing for icing. Same thing for cake types. You'll see the only thing that really changes is the entity to which it links. Same thing for contact as well. Okay, so this is, of course, how a user will be able to navigate around your application. And then if I close my sitemap designer, go back to the app designer. here I'm able to define which dashboards, business process flows, which we didn't talk about today, or entity views. We show, hey, which forms, views, charts, or dashboards are we going to include for each of those different entities? And so that's what drives the various experiences that you'll see in the app. So we'll click through that real quickly, and then we'll wrap up. So I'll go back to my Dynamics item. So if we'll wait for me to reconnect. So if I go all the way to like kind of the home or app discovery screen that Dynamics users see, this is where I'm able to see the apps that are published. And so this is where we see the Cupcake app that we created. You'll see we maximize smiles and minimize tears with our Cupcake application. When I select that, it takes me into my application, and I'm placed on the Cupcake request view. And then when I select this guy right here, this is where we see the group and the various different views that were included in my application definition. And so, finally, we wrapped up with business logic with Microsoft Flow and how you can use Flow to automate your common business processes. Now, if you want to learn more about Power Apps and Microsoft Flow at Build, we have a bunch of sessions. For the ones that are on Monday and Tuesday, unless you have a time machine, I guess you'll have to stream them. However, we have a ton of sessions today. In fact, some of them starting right about now in the Expo Hall Theater. So if you run quickly, you might be able to catch some of those. As well as Matt will be doing a deep dive on the custom code extensibility options available in Power Apps and Dynamics later today. So kind of picking up where we left off. We really focused today on the declarative aspects, on what you can do with app customization. And so we'll talk more about custom code later today. With that in mind, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining me. And well, if we only had a few cupcakes to eat. Fill out an eval, tell everybody I did a great job, and I'll get to come back again next year to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time.